You may have heard about ETTR, exposing to the right, or overexposure, to avoid noise in dark areas. But ETTL is about underexposing, in an attempt to avoid losing detail in the very lightest areas. If you wanted the sky to have detail, you might want to underexpose this by a stop or two. Cameras these days can handle that underexposure just fine, but not overexposure, as I'll show you in a minute. So whether it's the sky or, in this case, the girl's hair being overexposed, yes, you want to underexpose the image so that you retain detail in those highlights. So for this one, I underexposed it about 2 stops so that I'd retain detail in her hair. Blonde hair is especially susceptible to that problem. So when we bring it into our RAW conversion software or Photoshop, but it's better done in RAW, we can lighten the areas that we want to have lightened and leave alone the areas that we don't. One thing I sometimes hear from photographers is that they like to edit images that are deliberately underexposed. They'll lighten it either in RAW or Photoshop. But unless there are highlights that you need to retain, this is really an unnecessary extra step. In this image, there are no highlights to be concerned with, so just expose it properly. I ran a test with a Canon 5D4 to see where overexposure starts to be a problem. 1 stop, no problem. 2 stops, starting to lose some detail in the highlights. 2 stops, starting to lose some detail in the highlights. As you can see, 3 stops over is unacceptable. But you can sometimes save an image like this by making it black and white. We have more tolerance for loss of detail in highlights when it's in black and white. And you can darken the nearly blown out areas to make it look better. And of course, 4 stops over is completely gone. So as I showed in the previous lesson, we can underexpose by 5 stops and still have an acceptable image. But we can't overexpose by anywhere near that same amount. Some cameras, like medium format cameras with their larger sensors, may have a wider dynamic range, but for the present day, 5 under to 2 over is pretty standard. I relied on the dynamic range of the RAW file here to fix an overexposure problem. A single exposure can't handle this brightness range. Here the subject and the snow were in the same light, but the snow was blown out due to the camera's inability to record detail in that bright snow. So I made a darker version of the RAW image that shows the texture of that snow. Then I layered the 2 images and used a layer mask to erase portions of the top layer to reveal the snow detail in the bottom layer. Including the sky is a popular technique these days, but I have concerns about the long-term value of that style. So darkening that sky in RAW brought back the tonal levels more in keeping with the key of this image. Because this girl's in the shade of a scrim, she's receiving less light than the chairs in the background, which were in direct sunlight. I exposed for her, but then the background chair is overexposed without detail. So I made a darker exposure in RAW. Then, because she was sharply defined from the background, I used the magnetic lasso tool to select the background. Then I copied that background to the previous image. Now we have an image with detail in those chairs, and everything is within a printable range. Some photographers claim that if you expose JPEGs properly, they are every bit as good as a RAW exposure. But as you can see, that's not always true. RAW gives you more control over dynamic range and color fidelity. And one more look with the before and after images, showing how we were able to save the overexposed areas. Some images will need help with highlight and shadow detail. RAW conversion software has sliders for both, but they also unattractively affect the midtones. This image needed help to show the cool sun rays and shadow detail. So this was the result of 3 renditions in RAW. I was without a flash unit here, so how else can I lighten her but keep the dark sky? Well, it can be done with very careful masking, but there's another way that requires less handwork. We can do that with high dynamic range combinations. HDR images work with several images spanning the full range of exposure. I made incrementally lighter exposures from the RAW file. It also helps if you have a camera with a wide dynamic range already, so you can get more out of it. Finally, I used Photomatics to automatically combine all of those for this result. Photoshop does have an HDR feature, but I couldn't get it to work with the images produced from the same RAW file. And in case you're thinking this could have been gotten by adjusting the shadow and highlight sliders in the RAW conversion software, that's what this looks like. That's not nearly as wide a range of tones as with the HDR image. This isn't something we need to do very often, but it can have its place, especially if you're a natural light shooter.